Thank you for joining me for the first ever extended version of Quick Hits, where we're going to have a little more time to discuss a topic. Today, I have with me Dr. Ulwyn Pierre, Dr. Mohan Ananda, and Dr. Bob Choate. And I want to continue our conversation about how organizations can avoid engaging in the Peter principle, which is when you promote someone to their level of incompetence. So someone's good at a job, you promote them, they're good at that job, you promote them, and then they end up a job that they can't do, and you're kind of stuck with them there. And in our last conversation, Dr. Mohan, you were talking about how you believe healthy organizations don't have a problem with the Peter principle. So I'd love for us to kick off with you kind of tell us more about that idea.
Certainly. I mean, of course, I wouldn't say that they don't have a problem, but generally they don't look that as a problem because of most of the successful companies are based on competence. That when you have, means even you start as a small company or when they grow, take many of the really successful company, at least from my experience, if you are not competent enough to take that whatever position you're supposed to do, you will be thrown out. You will be gone. I mean, the only people who keep those so-called incompetent people are those who are incompetent themselves. So in order to preserve their position, they want to have somebody less competent behind them. That's a very, very, typical, but those companies cannot succeed. So it's a Peter principle happens by accident type of things, but if it is maintained, then it's a failure. It's not going to, because in my opinion or my experience, the companies are successful because of its people. People are the most valuable asset for any company. And in fact, in some cases, I even talk about after 5 o'clock or whenever people leave, all my assets are leaving the company. Because that's the value is in its people. And you want the best people to be. I mean, if you find somebody has gone up certain level and they're not really up to their mark, it's time to get rid of them. I mean, no question about it. So that's the thought, at least my experience I've been, and I've been, of course, I don't have a lot of companies I know, but I've run reasonably large companies. And like one example, give me one company which I, of course, recently sold. The company is stamps.com. We started practically nothing and we grew. And when we sold it for $6.6 billion. So it's a successful company. And our management, we lost a few of them over the 25 years, maybe out of the top management, maybe 1 or 2. And in fact, we lost them not really going to work for somebody else. Some of them, they decided to retire because they became wealthy enough. They don't want to work for anybody. So there are examples of that. In fact, I have discussed in my book, I wrote, of course, I have a book called Autobiography of an Immigrant. It's right here, this book. It has given certain clear examples of that type of growth, and we didn't lose any real management. I mean, the people left mostly because of their own. So the lesson I learned, you have to get the right people. And once you have the right people, you promote them, the right way, so they grow and they actually become the most valuable asset. That's one small example, and I think that is true in any successful company.
Okay.
Did I answer your?
Yeah, that was a great kickoff. A great place for us to start. So either Bob or Dr. Ulwyn, Dr. Bob.
I'm going to piggyback on what he said and extend it, especially regarding management, because a lot of managers, especially lower level managers, but I see it in a lot of organizations, is that they tend to focus too much on supervision. In fact, it was W. Edwards Deming in his 14 points on point number 7, where he talks about management should be focused on leadership and not supervision. And I saw the same thing during my years in a Marines. So in the Marine Corps, we're taught that every single Marine is a leader, because leader can come from any level of rank. And if a unit commander is out, something happens, then the next level takes over all the way down to the basic private. And I saw this firsthand. Being in Force Recon, we had engaged in everybody being a leader and in that sense, and we were taught leadership, and it carried over into the rest of my life, whether in business or even now in terms of what I'm engaging in.
So are you saying that if you train everyone to be a leader, you don't end up in the Peter Principle because everyone knows what they're doing at any level? So
the goal of a true leader is to ensure that those below him become leaders. And Deming recognized this. So when he went over to Japan in the 1950s, he instituted that, in a sense, grew the Japanese industry based on his principles, whereas the United States didn't fall in line with what he was talking about until there was an interview, I believe, in the early 80s where he was on national TV, and then all of a sudden all these companies started calling him and everything. So leadership is important, and the right training coming in can help to develop leaders. You don't want to develop people who are robotic in nature. You want to develop leaders where they can take over. And if that's done, then we're not going to see anything like the Peter Principle if it's done right. So I agree with Dr. Mohan. That's a healthy organization. And it's really, really important. In fact, I know that Dr. Mohan, you tend to be like one of those leaders, correct?
I don't know, but I am more, there is some part to it, but I am more like, I want to just compare here between Reagan administration and Carter administration. Just to give Carter is a nuclear scientist, extremely capable, very smart person, no question about it. Reagan, I wouldn't call him in that category. He's not that, he's more of coming from a entertainment industry. So he's kind of that depth of knowledge is kind of limited. But if you look at the two administration, what did Reagan do? Reagan brought the best people and gave them freedom to do things. You delegate the job and you go and do it. What did Carter do? Carter also got good people, but Carter was micromanaging. He was doing everything he wanted to do, and nobody could really, do anything because Carter has to. So you don't have an independent. But what Bob was telling about leadership is extremely important. If you look at those two administrations, which one was successful? Reagan administration was successful than Carter. In fact, that's where Reagan got reelected. Carter didn't get reelected. Of course, there was other reasons. The inflation was very bad and things like that. But whatever it is, I like that. I consider myself leader, but my leadership is not really directing them what to do. Leadership is to accumulating leaders together, meaning you get the best people, give them the responsibility, and give them the freedom to act accordingly. And that will prompt to success. That's my belief.
Yes.
I have experienced.
You just perfectly laid out leadership versus supervision. So you was not supervising all the details. You had leaders that actually came in. So yes, well stated.
I totally agree with that.
Yep.
Dr. Ulwyn, I would love to hear what your thoughts are about the Peter Principle and what these two gentlemen have laid out for us.
Okay, when we talk about leadership, we talk about leadership in generality, because I believe that most companies, they have an anemic interpretation of what leadership is. And the reason why I say that, because when you think about in the past, hard skills were much better than what? Soft skills, okay? Hard skills, so therefore that was valued. Leaders are there to lead others. So the soft skills are also very important because they're dealing with people. But you have the people in leadership with the hard skills, from my experience in working with my clients, they will be talking about that. They said, I don't know how to deal with that. I have no experience of dealing with that. I did this because I'm supposed to do this, but I wouldn't want to be treated like that. Okay? And you see a lot of that now, though, because of the pandemic, and people have now changed. It's a different set of people because they came in head on with your mortality. So the decision-making process is different in terms of what's important. I may have just a few years to live based on what's going on here. I want to make sure that I really live my life. I am not prepared to have a thumb on me for the rest of my life. I'm going to break out and live my life. So those are the kinds of things now. So what is happening that leaders are fighting against? Soft skills are becoming much more important than hard skills, based on the experiences that people have gone through and what has become important to them now. And they're fighting it.
And does that change the Peter principle, where people who maybe were good at a job where the hard skills mattered, now the soft skills are more important? So they're in a job they can't do because they don't have the soft skills?
Yes, they're in a job that they can't do, but compounding that is the uncertainty, the disruption, the turbulence that they have not been trained to do or to address. They know what traditional leadership, which is linear for most companies, but now they have to think, and there's all this stuff coming to them and changing, so that they may be doing something today and they go home. Traditionally, they may change, but nothing big enough for them to be concerned about. But when they come back next day, because of what we are going through, there could be big changes, and they do not know how to adjust to it because they don't know how to examine an organization or an environment well enough to understand the kind of changes. It's like somebody who is tracking a hurricane. Now, every time it turns or does something, they don't panic. They understand the dynamics of that environment. And therefore, irrespective of the changes that are taking place, they're on top of it because they could understand the nuances. And therefore, I'm coming back to the point. In doing that, they become better leaders, more humane leaders, and leaders that think.
So if we, as leaders or as executives, we're in a position, we recognize that someone underneath us maybe is at the Peter principle point, or the skills they've needed to be able to pivot because of the pandemic or whatever, they don't have them. A, I guess the first thing we have to do is how do we recognize that? And then B, what do we do about it?
Well, the thing about it is that things have gone so bad that if you're deaf, dumb, and blind, you know that things have changed. You know that, and you know that you don't have the skills. They know it, but they're afraid to identify it and reach out for help. Because what happens when you're looking at a leader? The leader must be strong. They must know everything. They must not, those types of things. So this time is a very, very difficult time. So I think the Peter principle is important. But I think with all the stuff that's happening, there are other things that are just important, or the challenges are just as strong. And that's what makes it complicated today in truly leading, because my clients they're fighting to learn what it is to be human. They're fighting to learn what it is to be humane.
Dr. Mohan, what do you think? If a leader recognizes this problem now, okay, what do they do?
I think if I were in charge, and if I think the person is not really competent or capable of what he's doing, I think he should be given the task of what he's capable of, rather than keep him in that same position. Because if Peter principle is the way the company manages, it is contrary to innovation. There is no growth opportunities, because everything gets stagnant and everybody become less qualified in every step. So you have to correct it the first time you see it.
How do you notice it? That's my question. How do you notice it?
You will notice it if you give, for example, give an independence of doing certain things. That is his job. And you can assess. See, most companies have yearly review, but some companies have quarterly review. They will review what his tasks are. And generally the tasks are, in a typical review process, the tasks are determined by the employee or by the division head or by the vice president or whatever the title is. He will say, these are my things, this is my milestones, this is how this is going to be done. And the person who reviews will look at it, what he has promised in relation to what has been delivered. And if the review comes back, it's not really done, now you have a problem. That's the...
May I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Dr. Mohan, have you found, like, if you could give it like a percentage, a number of companies that are really run by powerful leaders? What's that ratio? I mean, by really powerful leaders who understand what it is to be truly leading. What's that ratio?
I don't know that ratio, I cannot say. But if you look at the successful companies, of course, that does not mean every layer they have a leadership. I mean, the right type of people. But if you look at the top person or somebody who is really, most successful companies, it is that leadership. Otherwise, they won't be successful. So,
okay.
I do feel like, this is a conversation I've had previously on Quick Hits, is there's so much out there about how to be a good leader. Why are there so many lousy leaders?
Because there's no consistent interpretation out there of what it is to be a great leader. Are you charismatic? Are you this? Is there a combination? Because things are so fluid. Sometimes I need to be charismatic. Sometimes I need to be low key. Sometimes I need to be whatever. And how do you juggle that within the context? So for me, what I assume, at least from working with my clients, I have found most of them are not confident in their leadership because they don't have many of the skills that's needed to be a true leader, and they have not been trained, so they don't know where to pull from. And what I've had to do is to help them, because they'll say, so how do we deal with this? And then I'll walk them through. So they understand and they become much more confident and they become much more resilient and they become much more humane, okay? And then what happens with the Peter principle, that does not become, as Dr. Mohan said, does not become that much of a problem because now they understand the environment and they're operating within the environment and they're not afraid to be weak. They're not afraid to be strong. They're not afraid to be whatever. They're dealing with the environment as it is, the reality of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And now that Dr. Bob is back, I'd really love to ask him, like, how do you notice when someone has reached that level where they're like in a position they can't handle, and then what do you do about it?
Well, I think I'm experiencing that right now because I think my internet connection today has reached its level of incompetence for some reason or another. So I don't know.
But so can you speak to that? Like you've owned a really productive company. You've owned a successful company. How do you notice if someone's in a role where they just are floundering?
Yeah, so I'm going to apply that to my own self. I like leading, but I realized that in order to scale the company up, my level of competence just wasn't there. So I ended up having to fire myself. But that was being self-aware, and I think that was important for myself. When I start noticing a lot of companies and organizations, and including what I've done, is, and as Dr. Mohan, looking at the people, making sure that I brought in the right people that I knew that could take it to the next level. So at an entrepreneurship, as a startup, I needed a certain mindset. But that same mindset didn't apply as it started scaling up, as it started growing and everything. And I had to realize that, had to realize it with myself. I was very good as an entrepreneur, but when it started growing, it took a different mindset, and other types of people had to come in. But again, that was my own awareness, self-awareness, number one, and then awareness of the environment of the company and then what was needed. And I don't know if a lot of leaders do that. I don't think a lot of leaders are self-aware enough in order to go there.
I think successful leaders do that. Exactly what you said. That's the sign of success. That means you have to be aware of your limitation. You have to supplement it with the right leadership. And that's if you look at the top 100 companies in the New York Stock Exchange or any exchange, those are really growing as a good leadership. If not, the board will find some way to replace it. I mean, that's a history. So Peter Prince goes in there, and if you stuck with them, it's a failure.
Mm-hmm.
One of the points I think that you could look at is that when people are moving from management to leadership, there isn't a strong transition to help them make that move. So therefore, even though they are in leadership, they are still managing.
Right.
And does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, what is happening? They are still in the hard skills and floundering, because what they recognize now, I am not sturdy enough or competent enough to assess what I am supposed to do versus what others are supposed to do. So I think you see much of that when they begin to make that shift. There's such a lack of preparation.
And I think, Bob, to your point, very few people are going to raise their hand and say, hey, I've been promoted to my level of incompetence. Somebody needs to do something different. I mean, if you own the company, it makes sense because you can bring in a CEO or whatever and step aside as the owner and CEO. But in a corporation, that's not going to be a thing.
Yeah, I think a lot of people's egos and their fear kind of stops that. And to Dr. Ulwyn's point of view, so when we're at the lower levels, we're more of tactical thinkers. I experienced that when I was in the Marines. So we're more tactical. We actually have to engage in terms of, but as you start rising, you go from tactical to strategic. So you have to look at the big picture, and a lot of people just can't go there. And I had to learn to my own self to rise to that level and look at the whole system instead of like being part of the system, being a cog in the system and just doing my part. And people that move from being that cog and they're very, very, very competent in that cog at what they do at the tactical level. But as they start moving up, they have an inability to see the whole as you're going to need in order to lead an organization and even leading a department. You cannot be very, very good at being a cog, and then all of a sudden you have the system that you have to work in. So a lot of people can't expand in terms of that, and unless they're self-aware, they're going to be stuck. And their egos and their fear is just going to keep them stuck.
Go ahead, Mohan. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I totally agree with that statement. In fact, there are two types of people. There are leaders and followers. So in that category, there are certain leadership qualities start right from the beginning. And those are the ones who will rise up to the real leaders. The people, those who just follow and act according to somebody's instructions, if that's the one who promoted to the leadership, it tend to for failure. So that's these types of what Bob said is exactly right. There are certain characteristics are there in leadership, and those are the ones should lead. Otherwise, the success of the organization is just very suspectful. I mean, it may not happen.
Okay.
So I read a book recently that was talking about how the only way to get promoted in the American business model is to become a leader. There's no way to be a rock star that is absolutely really good at being a cog, and you need them in that place and they continue to grow. They're going to hit a ceiling. And so to the point that we're talking about now, if you're the type of person who's really good at your job, but you don't have the soft skills or the self-awareness to become a really good leader, you either have to get promoted into your level of incompetence or you stop being promoted.
But in good companies, that promotion to the space of incompetence is a wrong thing to do. If that happens, that's not a good thing for the company.
No, it's not. Absolutely, it's not. So what can companies do differently, or what can leadership, executive leadership do differently, so those people who are really good can continue to grow and progress in their career without having to become the leaders that they're not capable of being?
But you can train them. You can send them to, like many there are like executive leadership, executive management training. So they attend classes and they can see whether they can transform from that, whatever they are lacking, into being a successful leader. If that makes it, they can go up. So the training is a good process, and many companies provide that opportunity to train. So I don't know if everybody does, but that is an essential thing. In fact, some places, meaning an individual, he recognizes his limitation and he should seek out training himself.
Yeah.
I think now with the challenges that's going on within the environment between companies are finding it very difficult to get people to appropriately prepare their leaders. And I'm seeing that a lot, because what it is that they're losing control based within the environment in which they're in. And they're having more and more difficulty. From speaking to quite a few leaders, that's what they are saying, is that we cannot get people who could really come in and, within the context of what's happening, to provide them with the kinds of skills so that they could truly lead, because so much of them is compromised by the kinds of things that are happening.
So are we making the assumption? Sorry.
Huh?
I just want to say, are we making the assumption that, assuming they can find someone to train the leadership skills, can anyone be taught to be a leader? Are they skills that can absolutely be learned by anyone?
They have to want it. They have to want it.
Okay.
They have to want it.
I think that's like anything else. And I think even before a person gets in, because if we look at our educational system, especially here in the United States, it really has done a disservice. It doesn't develop the kind of skills that leaders need. They're developing more focused on hard skills, and it's crazy. And I remember the No Child Left Behind, and then all this other kind of stuff, Head Start, all these kind of programs has not developed leadership at an early age. And yes, leadership can be taught, and as Dr. Ulwyn said, people have to want it. And we see this across, again, what I said earlier, people are very good at being a cog. And Dr. Robyn, you come from a sports background. How many good athletes, or the exceptional athletes, have been able to transition into coaching? How many?
If you're really, really, really good at something and it comes naturally to you, you can't teach it, because it's too natural. You're just like, I don't know, just do it. Do the thing. You don't know how to teach it. It's only those who've had to come through the process of learning and failing and learning and failing who become the good coaches, who become good coaches.
Yes. And we see this. Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Ulwyn.
Because they could identify with the needs of the people, because they have gone through it.
And Dr. Mohan, I know you've gone through it in terms of your business building and everything like that. But I would also surmise you've done the same thing in astrophysics as well. You've seen the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, in everywhere, the leadership skills, I think some or other, I don't know whether it is genetic, but there are certain people have that inborn. That's they are very creative, innovative, and interface with people. But some people are mostly subservient and listen to. So there is that two class. So even though you can try to bring them to the other side, I'm not that confident. This is just a subject. This is very subjective opinion. It's not an objective in the sense, I don't know whether people have done the studies. So there is that, so they will shy away from taking that because they're a little inhibited and they're afraid of taking, like I said, anything. The leaders have to make decisions. Making decision is the first and foremost requirement of leadership. And many people are afraid of making decisions. They shy away from decisions. And when you shy away from a decision, you are not qualified to be a leader. You can make a wrong decision. That's okay, because nobody makes all right decisions all the time. But decision making is a characteristic of leadership. And if it is not there, then you are not. So that's a kind of a one example of which category you would belong.
Yeah,
I think there's definitely a pressure to be mediocre, because if you don't try, you can't fail. And so if you're not willing to be that leader who says, I'm going to step in, I'm going to make a decision, I'm going to risk failure, you're doomed to being mediocre and you can't be a leader.
Yeah. So that goes back to my talking about an educational system, because our educational system says you have to be perfect. You cannot fail. So we have our grading system, A, B, C, D, F, right? And if you get an F, you're knocked down. I mean, that's a big fat F, and that's no good. They circle it and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, we lost Bob again. This conversation has more drama with the internet, I tell you.
Yeah. Something that Dr. Mohan said that intrigued me, because I find it to be true. You said people who have grown up seeing leadership, it becomes a natural part of that. I grew up in an environment where I never learned leadership or transformation. I lived it. I didn't know what was happening, and therefore it came natural. And therefore you could begin to question certain things that are just fed to you on the spoon, and it does not make sense. So there's another level of decision making that is taking place. So yes, Dr. Mohan, I believe in that. I truly believe in that, because when I was in Trinidad, I saw leadership. I was part of it. When I left, what it was is that I kind of questioned a lot of stuff I was being taught. That's why I was called the positive disruptor.
The quality of leadership is asking the right questions. Because that comes in, of course, in science. In science, you always ask the question of the unknown or whatever that you do. And asking the question is the first step to be innovative, to create things. So leadership requires that you ask questions, and then based on the best information available, you make the decision. And it could be sometimes the right decision, could be wrong, but you, with the best information you have gathered and collected, you make the decision and take it forward. Then you course correct it if there is something wrong.
Well, I have really enjoyed hearing the three different experts talk about leadership and what they've seen, both from the business side and from the coaching side. So I'm going to thank all three of you, even though Bob has managed to leave us again. His internet is being difficult. And I'm going to cut us off there. So thank you so much for having this conversation with me. And I look forward to having another one with each of you again very soon.
Thanks, Robyn.
Hey, thank you. Thank you.